Gentlemen, this is Dan, Ezra and Tim. Tim we've had on before. Ezra, we've had you on before once or twice as well, from Suffolk Mind, a very, very good ally and sometimes advice guy for us as well. So thank you very much for your time on that on a few occasions. We just wanted a bit of a natter about PTSD, because we've done a few videos and I've spoken to many people about PTSD. And everyone thinks they know what it is. It's an army thing. It's after a massive something so big. And if it's just something small, like I don't know, you fell over, it can't possibly. I'm probably being dramatic on that, but it can't possibly be PTSD because it's not extreme enough. And that's dangerous. So I asked Tim, and there was another guy, but he can't make it. But I asked Tim and Ezra just to come and have a natter to talk about PTSD, because I think it's one of those things everyone thinks they know what it is. Now I'm going to put my hands up. Before MANUP, I knew of it. I just presumed it was one of those things where around Guy Fawkes night and the fireworks thing, people just hid under tables and sometimes gets aggressive with people. And that's not always the case. Actually, from what I've seen, that's not the case. So, Ezra, are you okay with just doing a quick intro?
Yeah, sure, Dan. That's so do you just want me to sort of say a little bit about how post-traumatic stress disorder is defined and what it, yeah. Okay, so as the name implies, it's after something, it's post a traumatic event. As you say, it can be any kind of an event where there is there's been a perceived threat to somebody's safety, to their life. So that could be you know, the kinds of experiences which somebody might have if they're serving in the military. It could be following a road traffic accident. It could be as a result of domestic violence or some kind of assault of one kind or another, whether it's physical or sexual in nature. It could be it could be witnessing a suicide. And what gives rise to the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder are when somebody's experienced something like that. They've witnessed something and they felt that they couldn't get away. They couldn't act on the fight or flight response, kind of the survival response, to run away or to fight back and protect themselves. And as a result, a particular part of the brain called the amygdala, which is like the brain's security officer. If you hold your hands out like this, Tim and Dan, hold your hands out like this.
Oh, sorry.
It's going to be one hand because I'm holding a tablet.
Oh, right.
Okay. You're going to end up with half a brain, Tim, but that's enough.
Sometimes I feel like I've got half a brain, trust me.
You're not the only one, yeah.
If you tuck your thumbs into your hands like that, can you see that? Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
And then you close your fingers over the top. Never punch anybody like that because you'll break your hands. You always want your thumbs on the outside, like Tim's got. Tim, you need your thumb on the inside of your hands for this. On the inside. There you go. Perfect. Pop your hands together like that. If you imagine those are the two halves of your brain, and the fingers are the kind of the thinking part of the brain, kind of regulating your emotions and sort of trying to think things through before you react. And then you wiggle your thumbs. Those are your amygdala, your security officer. And if they spot a threat, and they think it's severe enough, they'll fire off strong emotion. Bang, thinking goes out the window. So that's a conditioned response to being in an event where a need for security is completely unmet and we can't do anything about it. We feel we've got no control over events. And as a result, what will tend to happen following the event, if it's going to give rise to post-traumatic stress disorder, is that you'll see insomnia. The person's sleep will be disrupted, and so they won't be getting, they'll be waking up while they're dreaming and having nightmares, and that will prevent the dreaming brain from kind of calming emotions down, and then the brain knows it's a real threat, so it holds on to the memory, doesn't put it into your long-term memory, it keeps it right close to the front of working memory, so it can spot a match with that event, so that if it happens again, or anything that looks like it happens again, can trigger the fight or flight response, intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, memories, that kind of a thing. And then what you see in response to that very often, as well as the reoccurring nightmares, people may also develop coping strategies which are not always healthy. So in particular, reliance upon substances which sort of suppress our nervous system, they suppress our brain. So things like alcohol, cannabis, opioids, that kind of a thing. There's a quite an association between the two, a real risk that people will develop a dependency on things which sort of like give you take the edge off stress and try and calm the brain down for a while. So that's one outcome. The other is that they may sort of avoid things which are a match for the original experience. So if they've been in a road traffic accident, they may avoid driving or getting into a car, or they see a car that's a particular make and model that was a match with the original event, that may trigger a fight or flight response, or avoid relationships or work or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of a snapshot of how PTSD arises and what the symptoms are.
That was very, very well explained. So thank you very much. Hence why I asked you to join the video, because you're very good at explaining stuff for silly people like me. So thank you so much for that. So Tim, with your PTSD, I know you had your struggles with it. How long did it take you to actually get diagnosed?
It took me a few years. I mean, my initial damaging incident was 2005. Excuse me. Then I had a second one in 2005 and 2006. They were my major confrontations. Well, my diagnosis was at the end of 2011. So it took as long as that, really. And during that period, my behaviour became markedly different. To the degree at work where colleagues would say to me, "You're a loose cannon. You're off the rails, mate." That openly. So that gives you a pretty accurate timeline, really.
So did your help, was your help delayed because of you not accepting it, or was it there?
No, it was, to be really honest, it was the organisation. I think it was the problem that I came up against, because there was a point where I knew that I was quite substantially unwell, and following my most damaging incident, I knew quite quickly. I was in a situation much as Ezra's described, where my sleep from that day onwards, my sleep was dreadful for several weeks, to the point that I was having half an hour sleep, maybe a night. I was having repeat panic attacks in my sleep, and that developed quite quickly into the sort of nightmare pattern that Ezra's described very well. So I presented that to the constabulary and said, "Look, I've got this issue. Things are not okay. What's wrong? Where do I go?" And I think there was a reluctance on their part to recognize it, and I think also to make the link between the fact that my behavior as a serving officer was deteriorating, and that it was anything other than indiscipline, fear of jobs, stuff like that, really. That's really where the delay came from.
Okay, wow, that's amazing. Was you about to say something, Ezra, or you just got your thinking face on?
Yeah, so one of the things that I didn't mention was I didn't. Sometimes people may also be prone to what look like angry outbursts, and that's what Tim was describing. And that again, as our security officer, if it's like under pressure or feels that it's being stressed, or it's as if the brain is on red alert, looking out for potential threats. We may not be consciously doing it. It's a kind of an unconscious process for the most part, although sometimes the security officer will kind of recruit the thinking brain to kind of proactively worry and look out for potential problems. And that can give rise to the sorts of angry outbursts that Tim is describing. And it's not something that a person necessarily has a great deal of control over. They can just be triggered by things which are seemingly don't appear to be logical on the face of things. And that's because the brain, neuroscientists are fond of saying the brain is a pattern matching organ. What they mean by that is it's not looking at things in a straight line. It's almost saying, what's this like from what I've experienced before? It's a bit like this. So a little bit like, when you're a kid, or if you've got kids, and that you turn the lights out and there's like the dressing gown hanging on the back of the door, but it looks like somebody standing there, because the brain just sees a pattern. There is nobody standing there, of course, but as far as the child's brain is concerned, that's what it looks like. And the security officer operates a little bit like that. So if it perceives some kind of a threat or a criticism or whatever it is, because it's on red alert, it's more likely to kind of react in that way. And there's a real need for workplaces to be more, that the current buzzword for it is trauma informed. And what that really means is, if you unpack it a little bit, it's just to have some education around how events can affect people, so that people who find themselves in the situation that you've described, Tim, are better understood, and you know, support and understanding is available. You know, so people can say, well, you know, we've known you for a while, Tim, and this isn't out of character. This is a bit out of character, you know, and we know that there were these particular events. Do you think it's worth you speaking to somebody about it? And then you're in a position to say yes or no, aren't you? It's just a bit better informed.
Yeah, brilliantly described. Exemplary, mate. I mean, absolutely.
I am going to give you one question to both of you. Actually, the same question, and reply in your own way. One of the things I do find, normally from women, purely because our audience is men. Let's face it. So sometimes we get the partner just like, oh, I think my fella's going completely mental about this, that, and the other. I think he's got PTSD, or sometimes he's, they've got anger issues for no reason whatsoever. So I don't want to put 2 and 2 together and get 6. But anyway, so you have those kind of conversations. I was like, well, have you brought it up? No, we don't want to bring it up because we'll tip him over the edge. The trouble is with that, in my uneducated mind, is if you don't bring it up in the right way, it's never going to get resolved.
Mm-hmm.
What would you, if somebody asked you that, if somebody said that to you, what would you say to those? Because obviously you can't go to the doctor, can you? Because it's not you, it's somebody else.
It's a good question. It really is a good question, and it is a situation which will recur, isn't it? Undoubtedly, because in those relationships where there is existing pressure, and sometimes we are very frank, aren't we, with one another, with our partner, in a way that we're not with the rest of the world. Perhaps you see somebody's true self. Perhaps you see the parts that they can't hide, the bits they can't quietly tuck away, and unfortunately the negative aspects that you've described. How would you respond to it? It is a big question. I mean, I don't necessarily have an answer, but I think it needs to be aired and voiced. Absolutely so. There's got to be a start point, hasn't there, somewhere, you know? But it's very difficult for people to find what it is, and they are afraid of what the answer will be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I'm just the kind of, and my wife's going to probably kill me, but I've got my mental. I'm BPD, high function BPD, and I don't hide it. My wife's had a few issues with a few things, and I'm like, do you know what? You're doing my head in. I wouldn't say that. Actually, I have said that to her, but I'm not scared to ring her mum up. Call mum and just say, can you help me out with this? And I think we just need to remove that burden of, I must deal with this, I must fix this. Or actually, most people have got families. I
think that's very true, and we all three of us know as men that we are loath to seek help, aren't we? We are loath to expose ourselves, particularly in that kind of regard, and say, this is something that I can't deal with. It's outside my experience. You know, it's outside my toolkit to assess, really. I can see that I'm not okay, but I don't know what it is. So we shy away from it. And that's where we come back to the stuff that Ezra was describing, wasn't it? You know, negative coping and so forth, really.
I think that's right. On the whole, my experience of treating post-traumatic stress disorder when I'm working in Suffolk Mind's counselling and psychotherapy services and elsewhere too, is that it tends to be women that will seek. Well, we know that they use mental health services more than men do, and when you see both men and women, if they're coming in the later stages of their life, very often there have been many years, in some cases decades, of them trying to manage without seeking assistance. And sometimes it's the kinds of scenarios that you're describing where it's become a kind of a tipping point. And, you know, I'll meet somebody and they'll say, well, the thing is that I've been coping with this for some time, but you know, this is I can see that I'm having angry outbursts, and I'm snapping at my kids, and that's no good, and I start snapping at colleagues, and it's having a negative effect on my family life, and I really need to do something about it. So that's often the case. I think that's an interesting thing about men. We do have a tendency towards self-reliance, and I'll cope with it and I'll keep it to myself. And I think when it starts to spill over and affect other people, that's usually when men are like, okay, I don't want that to be the case. I think that men's tendency to avoid things is often born out of a desire to keep other people safe, protect other people.
Yep. And
I think that needs to be recognized more. You know, there are fascinating statistics around, I'm sure you've heard of these, where during combat, you know, wars and what have you, there are so many rounds of ammunition discharged that don't hit the target, that people that study the statistics conclude, they say, well, men must be deliberately trying to avoid hitting each other, because they couldn't miss with that kind of frequency. And, you know, it's not that they're rubbish shots, it's that they instinctively want to avoid harming others. So they'll bottle things up or avoid addressing issues to try and protect other people as much as to protect themselves, I think, anyway.
I think that's very true. And one of the things that brings with it, unfortunately for all of us, isn't it, is men and suicide. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, it seems to me, from my experience of the world and talking to people through mental health on my own journey, so many men consider suicide as a means to protect other people from them. Mm-hmm. And from their behaviors. And, you know, we all three know what a destructive path that is, but it's a common one, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is. It's interesting that you raised that point, Tim. I'm just currently doing some research, writing up an article on insomnia, reoccurring nightmares in post-traumatic stress disorder and suicide. And it's the reoccurring nightmares. So if you don't get the right kind of sleep, sort of calm the brain down, that will give rise to suicidal thoughts. But it's the reoccurring nightmares which increase the risk of people acting on those thoughts. And since I've been learning about that, when I meet people who are perhaps have a diagnosis of EUPD, BPD, or PTSD, and, you know, they'll say, well, you know, I've had some suicidal thoughts this week, and I'll say to them, what was your sleep like? And I'll do this in a very gentle way because it's a sensitive issue, right? So I'll say, can I ask you, you know, what was your sleep like on the night before the suicidal thoughts occur? And I'll always describe the suicidal thoughts as the suicidal thoughts, as separate from the person's core identity. And they'll think for a moment, they'll say, it was terrible, you know, I barely slept at all. And I'll say, it might be that if you've not had enough sleep, or you've not had enough dreaming sleep to calm the brain down, that it can leave some negative emotions in the previous day. That things feel a bit overwhelming the night after that. And they're like, yeah. And that's because our security officer is still super sensitive. So that the suicidal thoughts are there, but often it's because things have been a bit overwhelming. Would it be useful to kind of do some work around addressing sleep as well as treating the trauma? And most, you know, everyone's going to say yes to that, because who doesn't want better sleep? That's a kind of a recent, this is the first time I've sort of spoken to anybody about this outside of Suffolk Mind, because, like I say, I'm writing it up for my professional body's journal. But I think that kind of information, while researchers know about it, it's not really in the public domain. Like you were saying, Dan, people don't know enough about it, and they kind of, you know, think it's limited to people with certain kinds of professions, and, you know, certain events of the year will trigger it. I think this is all really, you know, to have a more mentally health educated or informed population. These are the sorts of things I think it would be useful for some of us to know.
No, I think that's a very good point. I mean, one thing, you know, I would say from my own experience, and there'll be guys who will watch this, I think, who will relate to this very, very well, is that at the worst points of my sleep, where my sleep was marked with repeat nightmares and insomnia and panic attacks, but nightmares especially, I was afraid to go to sleep. You know, there was no question that I was afraid to go to sleep, because I knew what would be coming. Right. And I got to the point where I'll be trying all kinds of stuff, like combinations of booze and night nurse, you name it, really, just to try and get some decent sleep. Well, you know, you both know the consequences of those things in themselves. But, you know, I don't think that I'm a wimpy kind of guy. You know, I don't shy away from a challenge. But sleep was one of the things that genuinely frightened me, because I couldn't control what was going to come. And I would feel how you've described. The next day would be a shocking day, which would probably start with me waking up tired, crotchety, and go downhill from there, really. Mm-hmm. So it was a cycle that I couldn't control, and you've described it very, very well.
That's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, Tim, because I can cite all of the research in the world, but when people bring it to life with their own experiences, that's where I think it has the most value.
Yeah. If you ever want to chat about sleep, if you ever want to chat about sleeping, I'm the world's worst sleeper. Literally, I get like four. Sometimes I do get a good night, but most of the time, on average, 4 to 5 hours sleep.
Really, right? Yeah,
I would say so. Yeah, I don't know whether that's linked to the BPD or the depression on that.
I suspect so. Insomnia is usually the jargon term is comorbid, which for viewers of our podcast means that people with BPD will are likely to have insomnia at the same time, and so it usually starts in adolescence or childhood, and about 50% will experience reoccurring nightmares as well. So that's not that surprising, and it's a pain in the ass for you, Dan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like my sleep. I just need more of it. But anyway, we've gone slightly over that 20 minutes. I would like to say you Suffolk Mind does help people with PTSD, doesn't it?
Yes, we absolutely do. So we have a counselling service where people will come for all sorts of different issues, but PTSD is one of them. There's a few of us who also specialise. We're trained as human givens therapists, and we specialise in the use of a technique called rewind, which is for treating traumas and phobias. And some of us have, seen hundreds, maybe thousands of people over the course of our careers. And I think most, although there's the evidence for it is still being developed and is still building, in about something like 70 to 80% of cases, we can successfully treat traumas in a few sessions so that people don't experience the symptoms anymore. They've got some relief from that, and then they can begin to work on getting a good night's sleep again.
Thank you very much. And Tim, can I just before I don't want to drag this out, and I don't mean that how that sounds, but the minute where you started to realise your problems and your triggers, how was you after that once you actually sought help?
It was an immediate change, really. I think any degree of control you can get over this helps, and it did for me, because it gave me the ability to step back and think, okay, well, this is triggering something. I see what that's doing. I can start to address it. That sea change was the one, really.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let me just hit that record.